So the Nightmare Frame boss event has begun, and in this video I'm going to go over how it works and the best tips to succeed in it. So let's get started. So what is the Nightmare Frame boss event? Well, it's an exclusive event to any guild where the goal is to defeat the boss, and by doing that you get a series of awards. Right now it's scout tickets and also guild exclusive medals, but eventually we will get more stuff. And because this is a guild exclusive event, make sure you join one if you want to partake, which I heavily recommend that you do. Here's how the Nightmare Frame boss battle event works. There are 10 stages that you must complete if you want to collect all the awards. To partake in any individual stage, it will cost stamina like any other battle in the game, aside from of course expedition mode. As you progress from stage 1 to stage 10, the boss will become harder, having more health and dealing more damage. Within each stage, besides the boss, you will also have to contend with normal enemies. And just like expedition mode, if a certain amount of pilots reach your blue zones, but obviously not all of them, it will not affect your score, so make sure your main focus is on killing the boss and not defeating the enemies. What's also unique about this particular event is that if your pilots die during the battle, it does not affect your score, so you can be more liberal with their uses on the battlefield, because again, the whole goal is to just defeat the boss and nothing else. One thing that makes this particular event unique is that during each battle you have a certain time limit to defeat the boss, and if you don't beat the boss within that time limit, you will still get a score based on all the damage you did to the boss during that individual battle. So make sure to stick it out to the end, even if you can't actually defeat the boss. And as I just said, you have to complete 10 stages if you want to collect all the awards, so keep that in mind when applying the other thing I said about the timer per each stage. Now eventually they will make it 5 instead of 10, which is great because the stamina cost is kind of annoying. They are also going to add an extra stage once they reduce it to 5, and in that extra stage they're going to make the boss really hard and will add even more elements that will increase the difficulty. What's nice about that is that they make the first 5 stages not too difficult, so anyone in theory, including free-to-play players, can get all the awards, and for those who are willing, you have an extra challenge ahead of you, which is the extra stage. But until then, we have to deal with the 10 stage setup that is the current state of the global release. And while not directly related to the Nightmare Frame boss battle event itself, they are adding the core luminous or the upgrade cubes to the guild shop, which gives you another incentive to partake in the event to get more guild medals, which this event does give you quite a lot of. And they will also give out 5 scout tickets at the start of the boss event, and then give you 5 at the end if you've earned them all. Right now, you get 10 scout tickets at the end. Okay, now let's talk about the boss himself, the thing you have to defeat in every single boss event starting today. Starting with the basics, that this enemy is obviously going to be stronger than any other one you have faced, especially in the harder stages in both the health and the damage output. So just like other bosses you might have faced in either the expedition missions or the normal quest stages, the boss here will also use a Nightmare Frame skill ability. The difference is the boss will progressively charge the skill throughout the battle, and you can gauge this based on how red he is. When he's fully charged up, you'll know, and then the boss will then teleport or jump, whichever term you want to use, to one of the pilots that's deployed, one of your pilots, and use the skill on them. To add some difficulty to the event, there are certain things you can do to the boss and certain things you cannot do. For example, you can stun the boss and you can't push or pull the boss. You can use the buff effects, and also the boss will not attack any of your cloaked pilots, and that is why Detard Reed and Halloween the Lelouch are very good in this event, which I'll get to later on in the tips section. But just for right now, note that there are certain things that can work on the boss and certain things that cannot, and you'll figure this out through gameplay as you test the different pilots. Throughout the battle, the boss is going to stay in the red area and will occasionally, as the description says, jump out to attack your pilots. I don't know if I would say occasionally, but I guess that's probably the best way to put it. It seems like it has certain intervals that it will do it based on however it was programmed. But yes, it'll stay in the red area and then it will jump out to attack a random pilot, which you can take advantage of, which I'll discuss later on in the tips section. Every time you complete a stage, whether it be by defeating the boss or staying around till the timer runs out, you will get a score, and that score will determine what awards you get. Now there are 3 different types of scoring which determine the awards you're going to get. Let's go over all 3 of them. The first is the total damage within one battle. And as its name suggests, it's the accumulation of everything you did within one battle. And to get all the awards from that section, just make sure to get a high enough damage score within one battle. In future Nightmare Frame boss events, you'll have to complete the extra stage to achieve this. For now, you'll have to complete stage 10. In both cases though, it's not always an easy feat, but I wouldn't worry too much about it because as long as you get a high enough score, you'll get the majority of the awards, and for most players, that's good enough. Next is the accumulated score of yourself during the event. And so how that works is every time you defeat a stage, that score will be added to this one. And as long as you reach a certain high enough accumulative score, you'll get all the awards for that section. So just make sure to complete enough stages to get it. Doesn't matter if it's the low stages or the high ones, just make sure to complete enough to get your score to that point. But again, keep in mind, you do have to complete all 10 stages if you want to get all the awards. And the final section is the guild total score, which is a combination of everyone else's accumulative score into one total, and that determines how much awards everyone gets. So it's very important that everyone partakes in the event to get the highest score possible. In this case, it's 50,000. In future events, it'll be 70,000 as more awards are given out. Now, besides reaching this total score, there is an incentive to want to get even more than that, because they usually give out some kind of notification on Twitter who got the highest total scores within each event. I think it's the top 5. So if you are that ambitious, you can always try to get the highest score possible, and you might reach the top 5 within everyone who's playing the game. I of course encourage both of my guilds to do their best so we can get the highest score in the game. But obviously, if you don't care about that stuff, just aim for the 50,000 now and 70,000 later on. The score itself that you earn is based on several different factors, including how difficult the boss was, if you have 6 or more people partaking in the event, if you're using the pilot that was exclusive, not exclusive, but released during this event. In this case, it would be Colin, if you actually defeat the boss, and how fast it took to defeat the boss. Hence why one of the main strategies within this event is to inflict a lot of damage in a short amount of time. Not the easiest thing to do, but it is very possible. So now that we talked about how the scoring works, let's talk about the awards themselves. Right now in the game, they are giving away 10 scout tickets if you complete all 10 missions and get the highest score. Well, not the highest score, but you reach the 50k guild score. They are also giving away guild medals, which you can acquire by getting high enough total damage in one battle, and of course your accumulative score throughout the entire event. Later on, they'll give us normal coins and also a free nightmare frame with all the items you need to fully upgrade it. When that happens, this event will be even more lucrative than it is right now, because for many you might think that 10 scout tickets and guild medals are not enough, and I completely agree. So by comparison, this first event is not that great, but later on it will be definitely worth it to partake in these events, especially when many of the nightmare frames that they give out are competitive. And not only are they competitive, but they're also useful for arena mode, where they will give you a boost to your score if you use them. That change isn't coming for a while, but just keep that in mind as you play this game. Next, let's talk about the pilots that they release for each Nightmare Frame boss event. Normally, it's just one, and they give you a bonus score as you are playing the game. Now, one thing you should note that if you limit break it further, you'll of course get a higher bonus, which should be pretty obvious. Also, all those pilots are unlimited, but they are really powerful, so it's always worth going after them. At least some. Like this new Colin, I think is really good. There's gonna be a Psycho, which is also really good. The Schneisel is not good. Nully is okay. And so I guess it's going to vary between each event, but many of them are really good, and so it's worthwhile considering summoning these characters even though they are unlimited. So that's how the Nightmare Frame Boss Battle event works. Let's move on now to my top tips that you need to succeed in this event. And the first one, which I've stated multiple times, but I will state it again, which is to make sure to complete all 10 stages, and if you can't defeat the boss, at least hold off long enough for the timer to expire so you get something. Now let's talk about team creation. The first thing you should do is have a designated team for future Nightmare Frame Boss Battle events, because the team you produce for this would not be something you'd want to use for a normal stage, because as I said early on, this does not work like a normal stage. Make sure your team has a series of pilots that can cloak or debuff the boss, since those work against them, and don't use anything like stunning, unless of course that's for the enemies themselves, which is totally a viable strategy, but just keep in mind it won't work on the boss. I would recommend having no more than maybe 2 main attackers on your team, either melee or range, because the whole point of this event is to deal a lot of damage in a short period of time, so you can always build a team based around that where you generate a lot of costs quickly, summon your best attacker, and just keep attacking until the boss is dead. So just keep that in mind. Don't treat this like a normal stage with a standard setup, because again the whole point is to just defeat the boss. So just keep that in mind. You don't want to have too many attackers, you just want to have the best ones for just the boss himself or itself. Right now in the game there are only 3 cost increasers on deployment, with one of them being part of a exclusive event, so you probably didn't get that if you missed it, and this new Colin plus Jeremiah. If you don't have this Colin, which just came out, or that Cornelia, that means you only have 1 cost increaser on deployment, which means you're going to have to use more passive cost increasers during the battle. And because they have to stay on the battlefield, they are easy pickings for the boss, so make sure to have some kind of protection for them, either detard to cloak, maybe C2's barriers, or healers. Just protect them at all costs, because if they do die, well, you can't generate any cost and you'll lose the event. So until we get more easily accessible cost increasers on deployment, you have to use passive cost increasers, and therefore you're going to have to protect them on the battlefield. Now there's certain cases like Suzaku and Chino who can defend themselves, but still for most of the passive cost increasers, you're going to have to protect them in some way. So those are basic team building skills. Now let's talk about specific pilots that I would recommend for different uses within the Nightmare Frame Boss Battle event. Obviously you want to use cost increasers, if possible only ones on deployment. Right now in the game we don't have too many, but in the future we will. Until then though, you might be stuck using passive cost increasers, which is not the worst thing in the world, but they are sitting ducks for the boss to take out. Next, you want to consider using pilots that either buff your units or debuff the enemy. So we're talking pilots like C2 or Kaguya, which help out your own pilots from being attacked, and of course you have like Taizo and Clovis who increase the speed, a ton of attack boosters like Schneisel, Halloween Lelouch, Shirley, Cornelia, right? Stuff like that. You want to make sure you use enough attack boosters on your team. Obviously use pilots like Detard and Halloween Lelouch to cloak your pilots. This is again why Halloween Lelouch is so broken, because he can cloak pilots indefinitely, which leads to a certain way you can trap boss, which I'll get to later on in this video. You might also consider using Dorothea or Lloyd, who increase the skill gauge on deployment. Obviously Lloyd is better, but Dorothea is not too bad herself. The point is you might want to use that if you want to spam the Nightmare Frame skill gauge ability on the boss multiple times during a battle, which is again why that new Colin is also really good, because she makes the skill gauge almost at 100% before you even deploy the pilot. So a combination of those really helps in these type of events. Then you have pilots that do immediate damage on deployment. So we have of course Zero, the new Jeremiah that came out, the Halloween Jeremiah, and that new Suzaku, where on deployment he'll make the skill gauge go to 100% and also increase his attack power. So using those pilots is really useful because you can cause damage quickly and throughout the battle without putting them in danger, because the boss can't kill them if you're going to constantly deploy them, withdraw, and then redeploy them. So those are really powerful in the Nightmare Frame Boss Battle event. In fact, you can kill the boss on one deployment if you just bring out Halloween Jeremiah, at least for the early stages, which is again why the pilot is really good. Next, you have to consider using healers, and there's 3 different types I'd recommend. The first are ones like Maid Shirley, where you deploy her and then she will heal passively even if she's not on the battlefield. That's the best one because the boss can't hit her if she's not on the battlefield. Now the next one are conventional healers. If you don't have pilots like Maid Shirley, obviously use those. I'm talking of course pilots like Yuffie or Millie, something like that. And the last category of healers I would recommend are the ones where they make it so that if a pilot is killed, they will regenerate their health back to 100%. We don't have any of those in the game right now, but we will get them down the road. So when that happens, definitely consider using those on your teams as well. The next category I'd recommend are using pilots like Cecile, the 2 Ceciles that we got, which reduce the relocation time of all your pilots. They're not the only ones that do that, but just consider using those because if you can get out Jeremiah as fast as possible, or Halloween Jeremiah of course, that would make your life much easier, so consider using pilots like the 2 Ceciles. The next set of pilots I recommend are the Immortals. These are pilots that can die for a set period of time. We currently have Colin and Guilford. Later on we will get Summer C2 and Halloween Alderaan. What's great about these pilots is you can use them against the boss without worrying that they might get killed in action. They can also block enemies from reaching your blue zones, which buys you time to take out the boss or wait until the timer runs out. Either way, these type of pilots are very useful in the game, and this is why I encourage people early on to purchase Colin when she was available when the game first came out. As you see, this type of character is useful in so many different facets of the game, and that's why the original Colin is still one of the best pilots in the game and will be for a long time. Okay, let's move on now to the best nightmare frames that I recommend to use in the boss battle event. The first one are the Glasgow, specifically Collins or the ones you get normally. You want a lot of these on your team because you want to make sure that your buffers and your cost increasers don't cost too much to deploy, because the name of the game here is speed. You want to deploy all your pilots as fast as possible, then basically vomit your best attackers and take out the boss. So make sure you use a lot of these nightmare frames so the cost to deploy your pilots is low enough. When it comes to the best nightmare frames with a melee weapon, I recommend the Galahad, the Percival, the Tristan, or of course the Gurren Mark II. And the reason why I recommend all of those is because I think they are the best in the game. The Galahad can inflict a ton of damage, especially in the hands of Bismarck, Waldstein. The Tristan is very useful because of its unique range, where you can actually have 2 pilots working together to take out the boss, and the special covers a ton of ground, which you'll find to be very useful in this particular event. The Percival is nice because it has 300 attack power and it's a lance, so you actually can hit the boss from further away that you could not do with the Galahad, the Gurren Mark II, or the Tristan. And the Gurren Mark II is fantastic because it deals fixed damage in addition to its high attack power, and it combos well with the original Colin. I think those are the best ones to use, but obviously if you don't have those, you can always use the Florence, which cloaks you, which is actually really useful. That way the boss can't hit you once you've hit him, or it rather. And there's also Guilford's Gloucester, which if you got nothing else, I guess you could use that one. Of course, Cordelia's Gloucester is not terrible either. So again, it just depends what you have, but those are my recommendation for nightmare frames with a melee weapon. I forgot to mention that the Sagetsu is also a great nightmare frame to use if you don't have the Gurren Mark II. From a range perspective, being nightmare frames with a ranged weapon, I think the Lancelot, the Sarlin, Zero's Borai, and of course the Borai Diesel are all fine uses for this event, although I'm pretty sure that the Lancelot is probably the best one. Then I guess the Mordred, but again, it depends what you have. The key is whatever you do have, make sure it's leveled up high enough to inflict most amount of damage. Obviously, the Mordred and the Lancelot will do more damage than the, let's say, the Borai Diesel or Zero's Borai, or even, what is it, the Sarlin. But as long as you have something really leveled up, it should be okay to some extent. I don't think you can beat the really hard stages with simply Sarlins and Zero's Borai, but you know, maybe you could, just depends how you use them properly. Or I'll put it like this, you probably could, but it'll take way more time. Oh, that's another thing too, you have Dalton's Gloucester, that probably would work well too, because it does inflict a lot of damage, and you can take out multiple enemies at a time, and it covers a lot of ground, so that's not bad either as a budget option. Now keep in mind, they're going to release even better nightmare frames down the road. These are just the ones I recommend from the current pool of characters. We will get the Gwaine later on, and specifically the melee weapon, and I heavily recommend going after that nightmare frame because the Gwaine is super broken in the nightmare frame boss battle event because you can spam the special multiple times. So keep that in mind when that nightmare frame comes out, which is going to be close to the end of R1. So those are the units I would recommend for the boss battle event. Let's move on now to my tips for actually defeating the boss itself. And the best way to defeat the boss is to trap him. Now let's explain how you would do this. So the first one is my favorite, which is the Hollowing the Leash method, or detard if you don't have Hollowing the Leash. So I mentioned before that the boss will charge its skill gauge during the battle, and it'll get redder and redder as it gets close to 100%. Now what happens is, once it reaches 100%, it has to attack one of your pilots. But here's the kicker: if all of your pilots are cloaked, it won't attack anybody. So the strategy is this: you make sure that the boss gets into a certain position where it's going to be locked in on its skill. Then what you do is you put all of your best attackers, either range or melee, around the boss, cloak them, and just keep attacking the boss until he is dead. The reason why the Black Knights work best for this strategy, besides the fact that Hollowing the Leash and detard are both part of the Black Knights, is the fact that you can use Taizo and Rakshata to boost those pilots before you start cloaking and killing the boss. It's a really good strategy. That might sound complicated the way I described it, but it's actually quite simple. The idea is just to make sure to time it right, where when the boss is about to use its special, you place all your attackers around the boss, cloak them, and so the boss can't move from that position until someone gets decloaked. If it's Hollowing the Leash, that'll never happen, which means you can kill the boss rather easily. Now, not every map will give you the opportunity to do this, so it's best to pick the ones that do, and you might be surprised how you can make this work in multiple ways. Another way you can trap the boss, well, sort of, is to take advantage of the fact that sometimes the boss might actually just stay in place for whatever reason. Perhaps you've done enough damage, or perhaps it just does that, part of the AI programming. I'm not entirely sure. But anyways, if you can figure out when the boss does this and what specific locations it will do it in, you can time it right, where you can put your best attackers on the battlefield to essentially take out the boss while it goes through its strange, just not moving phase. So keep that in mind. Now the next thing to consider is that the boss will jump and attack your units occasionally, and you can take advantage of this by baiting the boss. So one thing you can do is you can put out a cost increaser like Jeremiah, for example, and then wait for the boss to jump at him, then withdraw him. The boss will then retreat back into position and stay in position. And the reason why that's important is because it gives you more time to set up. Basically, you don't want the boss moving until you're ready. And one of the ways you can do that is by deploying a pilot, waiting for the boss to come to your pilot, then withdraw them so that it will automatically retreat back to its starting position. You can do this multiple times if you want to keep the boss in one location for a certain period of time while you set up your pilot, which is a really good strategy. Now, because the boss will only attack non-cloaked enemies, or I should say your pilots, well, I guess the enemies to him, but you know what I'm saying, you can take advantage of this by cloaking certain pilots you don't want the boss attacking, so it'll automatically have to go after the ones that aren't, which could be your best attackers or Colin or some combination of the two. That's a good strategy if you're trying to get the boss to only attack certain pilots while ignoring others. It is also important to note that the boss will jump on elevated areas to attack your pilots, even though the boss may not actually have a ranged weapon. So the best way to compensate for this is to not deploy your pilots in an area where they would be vulnerable to attack, unless of course that's part of the plan that you're going to implement to trap the boss. But it is kind of annoying, so just keep that in mind. So putting this all together, you want to make sure that you take advantage of the boss's mistakes during the battle. Make sure to position your troops in the right location to do this. Make sure to apply buffs after you're in position, not before, of course, and improve your timing, because timing is everything in each battle. You have to strike fast and hard, and if you struggle with that, the harder stages are going to be very difficult to complete. So the key is to combine all these different elements to defeat the boss, take advantage of his mistakes, use your strongest attackers against them, buff when necessary, and make sure you defeat the boss as fast as possible. For general tips on this event, make sure everyone partakes in it. Like I said, you want to get to that 50k, and it's easier if everyone helps out as opposed to one person carrying the team. I have been in situations where that's happened. It's not fun, so please, if you're in the guild, definitely partake in it. I don't kick people off for not doing it, but I might in the future if it becomes a problem. As I mentioned, if 6 or more people partake, you get a bonus, so please partake in the event. Super important for everyone on the guild. If you run your own guild, make sure to use the stamina boost. I will be doing doing that as well on my guilds, just because it makes everyone's lives a lot easier if you have more stamina to spend during these Nightmare Frame boss battle events. My next tip is to pace yourself, and what that simply means is that don't complete all these missions at one time if you don't have the time. Instead, just progressively get through them on your way to getting the highest scores possible. I do that sometimes on the weekends or whenever I have time in general, which never seems to be the case, but somehow I get it done. And the last tip, and possibly the most important, is do not forget to get your rewards when the event ends. You think this would be obvious, but a lot of people don't realize that you actually have to go back into the Nightmare Frame boss battle area when the event ends to collect your rewards. So don't be like that guy who forgets to do that and doesn't get their free Nightmare Frame with all the upgrades, or in this case, the guild medals and the scout tickets. So don't forget to pick those up when the event ends. It will not give it to you automatically. Well, at least the scout tickets. Now, it will give you the guild medals and the coins as you earn them in the battles, but it will not give you the guild awards themselves, the third section, which in this case is the scout tickets. In the future, it'll be scout tickets plus the Nightmare Frame and the free upgrades. So there you have it. That's how the Nightmare Frame boss battle event works. Let me know if you have any other questions about it in the comments section below. And if you want more interesting videos, I have a complete guide on how the game works and my thoughts on the recent Ash for Colin. Go watch those videos right now.